First of all, it's Sally Black for the camera, and what's your date of birth?
62232, June 22nd, 1932.
Terrific. Well, you hide it well.
Thank you.
Tell me a little bit about your mom and dad, Sally.
Well, let's see, they're both Swedish background. They both local Jamestown.
And what's your dad's name?
My dad is Carl Nelson, Carl William Nelson. My mom is Viola Vanstrom Nelson.
Yeah.
And I said they're both local. Don't have a lot of history on where or how they met. I think, which is all those questions you should have asked.
Yeah. Did they immigrate from Sweden?
No, their parents did.
Okay.
All my grandparents were immigrants, but Mom and Dad were both born in this country, or in Jamestown.
Sure.
We're all very local. And my dad was worked at the Erie Railroad offices for a while, and when I came along, he had been a Prudential insurance man for a number of years and was always a Prudential insurance man. My mom died when she was just 42, and Dad, many years later, remarried, and they ended up eventually moving to Florida.
Okay.
But the local basically were Jamestown people. I'm the youngest of 5 children, 5 girls.
Wow.
And actually there were 6 girls. 1 died as a child. So 5 of us were raised. 12 years difference between my oldest sister and me. I was the youngest. So then they all left Jamestown. I'm the only one who came home, mostly because of Gordon.
Right.
So they were scattered all over the country. One ended up in, my oldest sister, eventually, because of her husband's job, ended up in Vancouver, Washington, which is south of Seattle. One's husband was in the service, so they lived all over, including Japan. And the next one was after college, took a job with the State Department because she wanted to travel. She did. She lived in Germany for a number of years. So it was an interesting 2 or 3 years. I had a sister in Germany and one in Japan.
Wow.
And my youngest sister ended up marrying a man from New York, and she ended up living in New York. Then they got transferred for Texas, so she's been in Texas in Houston for a lot of years. And I came back to Jamestown, which I said didn't think I'd ever do.
Well, we were glad you did. I'm just envisioning your dad with 5 daughters and a wife, 6 women under one household. What was that like?
Well, we laughingly say he smiled the whole time. From Dad's point of view, I'm not quite sure. He was a good man. He was quiet. He kind of went along with us, could put his foot down when he thought he needed to, and we all responded very well. We had a lot of respect for and love for him. And I said my mom died when I was just 12. And there were a bunch of years where what was just Dad, and those years the family at home got smaller and smaller till eventually, when I was a student at JCC, it was just Dad and I at home.
Was there one of your sisters that sort of took charge of you being, because there was such an age gap, sort of the alter ego here?
The second oldest, my oldest sister was married and left home before Mom died. And so the second oldest sister, Glennis, her fiance, or the love of her life, was in the service in those days. So he wasn't around all the time. She was home, kind of picked up and ran things. And then Marv came home and they left, and June was the next one, and she sort of was in charge, finishing up high school and going to Alfred Extension. And then she left home, on to college and married and never came back. And then there were Marie and I were the two youngest, and there was a 4-year gap between June and Marie, so we ended up being at home and just kept the house, and we were with Dad. And then Marie finished at AUE, and she went away to school, and then it was Dad and I. And when I left and I got through, Alfred University Extension preceded Jamestown Community College. And so we were alone until I transferred. And when I left home, Dad remarried a nice gal who did not have a family. And so they were together for a lot of years, and we were all scattered and didn't all get together that often any longer.
Well, he clearly needed a woman in his life someplace. You know, he had all these women.
He was never without one.
That's right. That's clever. So you grew up during the kind of the Depression was there at the time. Was that part of your home? Do you remember doing rations? Do you remember that?
Well, rations came in when the war broke out.
Right.
The part of the Depression, looking back on it, I can see the impact, how the Depression affected our lives terribly. Nobody had any money.
Right.
And we had a household of 5 very young children. So yeah, I could see how that impacted what we did and what we had. And when you were old enough, you worked. If you wanted to go to school, you worked and went to school. Fortunately, Alfred had an extension, 2-year extension in Jamestown, which made it possible for everybody to stay home and work part-time and go to college. Mm-hmm. So Helen started that trend. She's the oldest, and Glennis followed. She was the next, and she chose not to go to school, so she worked. Had an interest, a man in her life who was a Jamestown boy, and he was in the service, so she was home working for a number of years. And then they got married, and he was still in the service. They ended up in Japan. June took over running the house and till she was through Alfred Extension, and then she went to Miami in Ohio. And she left, and Marie and I took over. We were just 2 years apart and very close. And Marie got through Alfred AUE, and then she went to Michigan State, and so it was just Dad and I at home.
Did you cook the meals? Were you cooking the meals while your dad was working?
Oh yeah.
So you were really running the house.
I kept the house, but I'd been cooking. I was always, as a younger, when I was in junior and senior high school, I was the first one home. Everybody else was either working, or if they were going to AUE, most of their classes were late afternoon or in the evening. So I ended up being the only one at home first. So I'd been cooking for years.
What's your go-to meal? The meal when you say, Sally, I want something really good that you're really good at. What is it?
Oh, I don't have one that has my label on it, because I did them all.
Yeah.
I like to bake. I could make a pretty mean pie, or chocolate cake, or so.
So in the old days, when Tim and Bob would come home from school or come home for Christmas, what is it they would say? Mom, can you make this?
Well, they all love Swedish meatballs.
As do I, yeah.
That brought out a big response.
Yeah.
So I knew that was going to be on the list. So we had that a lot when they came home. Otherwise.
So what was your Christmas meal look like? So I know what mine looked like, but what did yours look like?
Christmas meal. Well, of course, we had to have ham. Mm-hmm. Christmas Eve, we had meatballs and the Swedish smorgasbord.
Lingonberry and stuff like that?
Yeah, all the traditional that I grew up with.
Yeah.
And, well, actually, Gordy had most of them, too. He's Scandinavian. And, but a Christmas dinner was usually a ham.
A Yule Shinka. Did you have that? Yeah.
I didn't grow up with that.
Really?
We'd have a ham, but we didn't have the Swedish Yule Shinka.
Yeah, okay.
That was new to me.
Okay.
So I don't remember. It was a meal. I got on the table.
Well, yeah, no, we had Sill and Silta and
Oh, we had. I didn't like any of that stuff, but I did have it on the table.
Did you ever have lutefisk?
I tried it once. It was certainly not something I went out and bought and prepared.
I'll digress for a second. My mom's family was the sweet.
Oh, I know. I know.
And so we'd get together on Christmas Eve, and they brought everything. But I don't remember ever anybody, including Henry Carlson, bringing lutefisk to it. I mean, even he's in the business. If they had it, they had it.
He sold those awful fish, dried fish sitting in a barrel.
Oh.
He sold them, but he didn't eat them.
So, well, he may have had, if he never ate them in front of us, that's all. I have no memory of that at all. So even today, when I go to Norton Club stuff events and they have lutefisk, you really think twice about doing it. You really do.
Yeah.
Anyways, I digress. So growing up, 1941, I'm going to stop there for a second. December 7th, 1941, Pearl Harbor. Is there corporate memory in Sally's?
I can remember standing with, if it was one or two of my sisters, when the radio was on. And we stopped what we were doing and listened to the radio. And they announced the bombing December 7th, what was it, 1942?
41.
41. Mm-hmm. So I was only 9 years old. But I had sisters who immediately responded to it, and all of the boys that they knew were going to be drafted. And that was a given. I mean, that was their response to it, besides shock and sorrow. Their friends were very much involved.
Well, talk about that. I mean, during that 1941 to 1945 time period, it would have impacted your family. And do you have any memories of your sister's reaction during that time period?
Well, yeah, because my oldest sister had been married the year before, and her husband was, I guess because of his eyes, was drafted and then discharged because of a physical problem. But he went to work with, in research. They lived in Syracuse. He was in research at the university, and I'm not sure exactly what he was doing. He was pre-med, and his goal was medical school, so it was something in that field. And my second sister was going with a young man who was in the service. Ended up, he joined the Air Force before he was drafted, and he ended up in Japan, flying from what they called the hump, from India into China. And I can remember he wrote letters, and of course they were all what do you call it?
Censored.
Censored. They were all censored. So the way she knew where he was that every letter had a different letter in the name. It was Glennis A and Glennis, and she finally put all the letters, occurred to her, she put all the letters together, and he was stationed in Assam, India, and indicated that he was flying the hump.
Wow, that's interesting.
Yeah. So she was directly affected. They were obviously married as soon as the war was over. He got home. June was just casually dating. She was finishing up high school and going to Alfred Extension and then transferred. So she was in college. Marie and I were in high school and were junior high and went through all the stages as the war, and very concerned because we knew everybody that was, all the guys that were going.
Did you remember hearing of people from the Jamestown who were maybe part of the group that lost their lives over there?
Yes, I remember the first one was an Allen boy. He was a friend of my sister June's. So I remember that. I remember her response when she heard the news that he had been killed. So there were, I don't recall names, but there were others who we either knew or knew of because of somebody in the family knew them. So yeah, the effects of the service were very much a part of our household in those days.
Do you remember collecting stuff, whether it was metal or doing anything for the war?
Yes, we collected newspapers. I can remember dragging a wagon full of newspapers to wherever it was we were supposed to deposit them. We didn't have bread. I can remember fighting with my sister Marie as to whose turn it was to color the margarine, because it came in pound packages with a little yellow pill of containing yellow liquid. And so you mixed it so it would look like butter.
I'll be there.
And the table, you mixed turned the margarine into yellow margarine instead of, it's my turn. Because it was fun to do.
Yeah, yeah.
So,
Then the war ends in June of 1945 in Europe, and then ultimately in Japan. Do you remember celebrations in the area?
oh, everybody was celebrating. And then there was a big parade down 3rd Street. I can't remember. Anybody and everybody was in the parade. My dad, who had not gained much weight his entire life, was able to fit into his World War I, the uniform he wore when he was discharged from World War I. And I can remember, and they had a parade, he was able to wear that parade, that uniform, and marched in the parade. And I can remember standing in the crowds on 3rd Street, and some little boy in front of me, if you've ever seen a World War I uniform, some little boy in front of me hollered, "Look, Mom, look at that big Boy Scout." It was the kind of uniform that he had. So I always thought was really cute. So yeah, I can't remember what the original question was.
Well, no, all about just life and times during the World War II, and how the celebration ended.
How it ended, and then everybody started coming home. My sister, my one now brother-in-law, came home from the service, and they were married, and so life went on.
Yeah.
Sort of picked up.
So you graduated from high school what year?
1950.
So you graduated in 1950, and then you went to Alfred.
Well, the year that I graduated, Alfred became Jamestown Community College.
Got it.
So I was there at the very beginning of JCC. We were still had classes, which were Alfred always had their extension classes in the 3rd floor of the high school building.
Ah.
And they started about 3 o'clock in the afternoon, so it was late afternoon and evening classes, which gave everybody an opportunity to work during the day, schedule your classes accordingly, which made it possible for all of us to go through school.
Yeah.
And so the year that I graduated from high school, AUE became JCC.
So you're probably at the beginning. Do they know about you? My gosh, they'll probably give you an award or a doctorate, you know?
Oh, probably. I just doctorate at least. So, yeah. And,
Then after that, then what?
oh, I transferred. I had 2 years of liberal arts credit. I transferred to Columbia University School of Nursing.
In New York?
In New York.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that was a 3-year program, so I ended up with a Bachelor's of Science in Nursing degree.
So what was it like to be, here you've been in Jamestown, New York your entire life, and the next thing you know, you're in the Big Apple.
The first time I went to New York with Dad, and we went down because I had to have an interview with part of the admissions process or application process of the school. And so I went down to New York. That's the first time I had been there ever. And we didn't do a lot, but we got to see a little bit of the city, and what I had no idea what to expect, but I could see where I was going anyways.
So how was your experience there?
In New York,
Yeah.
it was interesting and fun and very rewarding, and made a lot. Most of my class. I was a student at Columbia University, but I was at the medical center, which is on 168th Street, way north of the main campus of the university. And most of my classmates were from the surrounding area, Connecticut, Westchester County, New Jersey. And they thought I talked funny. I had a funny accent. And I kept, how would anybody from New York City make that accusation? But they did.
So did you take advantage of Broadway, baseball games? Did you take advantage of the city?
Very rarely, but I did. I saw, well, I think I saw one ball game because somebody came to town that was going to the ball game and took me. And I saw just a couple shows. Number one, our time was limited because after our first year in the nursing school, you rotated, when you were in the clinical rotations, you rotated nights and evenings and all the things that you were facing when you graduated. So there wasn't a lot of time, there wasn't a lot of money. So we found that you could do standing room at the Metropolitan Opera for $1. So I did that several times. I had one friend who enjoyed operas. So when we could arrange time-wise, that was a good place to go. Occasionally, somebody from the family would come to New York and we'd get tickets to something. If I had a day off, as I advanced into junior, senior high school school, you were working shifts. So if you had a day off because you were working evenings or nights, I'd go downtown and just walk Broadway, look in windows and see the city.
Sure.
Which was fun. And so that was 3 years in New York.
Did you know you were coming back after that?
Oh, I was never coming back to Jamestown.
No.
No. I mean, they've got a whole world out there. Why would I come back to Jamestown?
So what was your plans?
Well, I was going to work. I don't think I had a place to go. I didn't have I thought about joining the service, seeing the world, and then I wasn't sure where I was going, but I figured I had a means of employment, so I could go anywhere until I met my first husband. And he had moved to Cleveland, or went to school in Cleveland and stayed there. So the plan then was to get married and go to Cleveland, which I did. And Tom died, was in an automobile accident 3 months later. So I stayed in Cleveland. I had an apartment, and so I stayed in Cleveland and worked for 3 years. But occasionally, come home occasionally, and would meet groups of friends on a Saturday primarily, were a few of my contemporaries who were still in town. And they would get together on Saturday night, and eventually, so I would go Saturday night. I would go out to see that group, and then Gordon showed up as part of the group, and the rest is history.
Well, so what was, just for the camera, I know a lot about Gordy, but what was his background? I mean, talk a little bit about your...
Well, I knew that he was an only child. I knew that he had graduated from Allegheny. We had known each other, or he was 2 years ahead of me in high school, but we were all in the same mix of people. So I had not known him well, but I had known him. His background was his mother was Norwegian, his father was Swedish, and had immigrated, I'm guessing in the 20s, I'm not sure. Anyways, they had gotten together, and so Gordy had gone to Jamestown High School 2 years ahead of me, and then had gone to Allegheny College, and graduated. When he graduated, he had come home to work. And I was, at that time, working in Cleveland. I finished school and then married and was in Cleveland. Lost my husband 3 months later. And so I would come home occasionally, and we had a group, contemporary friends, who were young, married, couldn't go out on a Saturday night because they had a couple of babies, couldn't afford to do that, but they opened their house, and so most of our contemporaries who were in town would gather at Sue and Denny's on a Saturday night. And so if I came home for any reason, I would end up there on a Saturday night.
So how did Gordy propose to you?
Well, I lived in Cleveland, and there's a gorge, a very pretty wild area, not too far from where I lived. And I think, I can't swear to this, but I think he would come, once we started dating, he would come up to Cleveland periodically for a weekend. And I think we were walking in the gorge, and just walking along, talking, when I don't know that he never got on a knee and said, "Will you marry me?" But we were talking, and we decided in the course of the conversation that we should get married. So that began what ended up 58 years later.
So you got married back in Jamestown here?
We were married. I came home and left Cleveland, came home, and we were married here, First Lutheran Church. And he felt he should stay in Jamestown. He was an only child. His parents were getting older. They were immigrants, and really, even though they'd lived here all these years, weren't in tune to everything that was available to them and that they should be aware of. So he chose to, after college, to come back to Jamestown to work. And so
where did he work?
He worked at Blackstone.
Blackstone, right.
And isn't that awful? I can't remember.
Well, I remember Gordy at Blackstone an awful long time, and then he worked at, I think, in Ellicottville for a while, didn't he?
Briefly.
Briefly, yeah. Towards the end. But always in sales, wasn't he? Salesman?
Oh, he was a salesman.
Oh, that he was.
No question about that. Yeah. That's where he belonged. And Oh, terrible. I can't remember where he worked. However, he was always employed. I can swear to that.
Well, that was good. And you likewise for years and years and years at WCA Hospital.
Well, I was when I came back to town. I got a job at WCA, and I did work there, med-surg, medical surgical units. And then I left when Tim was born, and I didn't work for a number of years. Had the 3 children until I got a call from a nurse friend, who was with the Jamestown School of Practical Nursing. Mm-hmm. And because I had a bachelor's degree, I was able to go to work. I was able to teach. So she needed a new faculty member and offered me a job. And it was a perfect job. I said, well, it was late August, and school was about to start. And the School of Practical Nursing was part of adult education, the Jamestown Public School System. And so school was about to start, and she needed a faculty, and I said I would. Carolyn was just 4. I had no intention of going to work. But we decided that was I'd always thought I wanted to teach, was an opportunity I couldn't pass up. So she was eligible for nursery school. And so I said I would take the job for a year. Well, I ended up 15 years later, I was director of the program, and it changed, became part of BOCES, and I left. But going back, I can't remember where we were. I had met Gordy and we were married, and he was not going to leave Jamestown, so that's how we ended. I accepted the fact that I would stay here.
Yeah, this was you were not coming back, but love brought you back here. I like that.
Yeah, it did that.
And here you are at Lutheran. That's great. And you have 3 children. Tim.
I have 3 children. Tim is where does he live?
In North Carolina.
Oh yeah, he's in Charlotte.
Right.
And married and has 2 adult daughters. The first one was married this summer. Ah. And Claire is a veterinarian. And he's at the stage where he's debating whether to retire or not. Oh, no. He ended up a banker in working in finance. His wife is a physical therapist, and his one daughter is a physical therapist. One's a veterinarian. And so Bob is sort of in limbo at this time. Bob is history major, history teacher, certified in several different fields of teaching history, and is currently living on this St. Thomas Island, teaching in a private academy. Mm-hmm. And we'll be home for Christmas. Oh, good. Looking forward to. And Carolyn is married and in the process of moving to Montana. She and her husband have built a house out there. That's where they're going to retire to. Good. And she was also in finance. Never understood. To me, that's the last place in the world I'd want to work. But, yeah.
Well, that's where your kids ended up. So tell me about, I knew, of course, I knew your husband well, and close friends with my family. They worked at Gunnell and Carlson.
Right. Yeah. Well, we had more fun and I did not know the Petersons when I married Gordy. So I met them and always enjoyed them. And we used to get together occasionally, and the boys would start with their, what I called the Gunnell and Carlson stories.
Right.
And they were both very good storytellers. And the minute they opened their mouths, either of them, and they played off each other beautifully. And they would relive their Gunnell and Carlson days. And you started laughing before they even got through the first story. They were wonderful. And so it was always an enjoyable evening, and you knew you were going to spend most of it laughing and not say a word because the two of them were so busy talking. But they were great times, much fun.
And for anybody that's listening to this video, there is a YouTube segment where my dad and Gordy and Ray Peterson, and Rolly Swanson
Oh, yeah.
are talking. They're just bouncing off each other. It really is hilarious.
I'm sure, I haven't seen it, but I'm sure it is. They were both such good storytellers, and they played it off each other well as I could almost visualize the people they were talking about.
Yeah.
Because, and what they did, all the funny things they said.
Yeah. Oh no, you're absolutely right. But we also knew Gordy through his intense interest in the Detroit Tigers.
My children were Detroit Tiger fans before they even could say the word. And they went through, as very young, when they were talking and aware of people, they had, beginning of every season, they had to memorize the lineup for the Tigers. You probably went through that.
Well, mine was the Pirates, I did.
Oh, that's right, you were the Pirates. Yeah.
So what was the connection? Gordy Black, Jamestown, New York, and Detroit Tigers. Did he ever explain that?
I think it was Lyle Peterson. Gordy, when he was in high school, got a part-time job at Gunnell and Carlson, which is a newspaper.
Oh, yeah, you should explain that. Yeah.
What do they call it?
Newspaper stand.
Newspaper stand, and it was interesting, and they had a lot of good stories about people because it was Gordy was there during the war, and there was cigarettes were rationed or not very available, and so they would exchange tales about the characters who came in to buy cigarettes if they were there or not. And I remember one story of a man, and they finally got to wrap the cigarettes in newspaper, and just had somebody came in because they'd heard that Gunnell and Carlson had gotten a shipment in, and all the old timers would come in to get their cigarettes, and they wrapped them in newspaper because they never knew what brand it would be. And then they weren't allowed to open them until they got outside. And one guy got outside and found out that he got Camels, I think. I can't remember, one brand which he did not think was acceptable. And he came storming in and threw them at him. I just remember one of their many stories about the characters.
Well, baseball was a big part of they kept score on the scoreboard.
Oh, yeah.
And at the time, and this is just my surmise, the Detroit Tigers affiliate was Jamestown Falcons.
Oh, yes, that's true.
And I suspect there was an interest there.
It was a real big deal. And since then, we've had occasion to meet somebody who was a young man playing for the Tigers, for their franchise in Jamestown. And there's always much hilarity and good conversation. And we lived and died with the children were Tiger fans practically before they could talk, and all their lives. So at one time, years ago, the kids and I put together and sent Gordy to fantasy camp.
Yeah.
So he got to play with the Tigers and came home worn out and limping because he ran too many bases. But it was wonderful fun. And
well, he gave me one of his baseball cards.
oh, that's right. By going to camp, he got baseball cards printed with his picture on it. So he handed them out to all his best friends.
Yeah, I was honored to get one. So someplace, somewhere, I've got a Gordy Black baseball card.
I wonder what's happened to those.
But yeah, it was intense. Well, and of course, he'd always told the story of being there at the game when Lou Gehrig's.
As a child.
Yeah.
His parents had friends in Brooklyn, and they had gone down to see their friends. And his dad, Gordy was young, but he had already become a wild baseball fan. And because of, what's the player? Hank Greenberg?
Lou Gehrig.
Yeah, that's who he saw in New York.
Right.
But he became a Tiger fan because of
Hank Greenberg. No, yeah, you're right, Greenberg.
Greenberg was his favorite baseball player. And that's how he stuck with the Tigers forever. But when he was young, he went to New York with his parents to visit some friends of theirs in Brooklyn. And he and his dad went to a baseball game where Lou Gehrig gave his final speech. Mm-hmm. He was playing on the team, and at some point he knew he was ill and wouldn't be playing again. And he gave a farewell address. So one of Gordy's best memories was being at that game and seeing and hearing him.
Well, I can tell you that, again, for the camera, for those that come to Jamestown, if you go to the Chautauqua Sports Hall of Fame, Gordy donated the ticket.
Oh, that's right.
The ticket to the Sports Hall of Fame, which is really priceless in more ways than one. And also, he had the unique experience in 1939 in Celeron. He went to an exhibition game, which the Jamestown Falcons at the time were playing in Celeron against the Pittsburgh Pirates, which they had 6 Hall of Famers at that exhibition game. And Gordy had the presence of mind to get a baseball signed. That too is at the Sports Hall of Fame.
Yeah, I'd forgotten that one.
And that's 2 huge pieces there. So for those that are listening, if you want to see the Gordy Black
collection,
it's at the Sports Hall of Fame, and Randy Anderson is very proud of that.
Oh, I'm sure he is. Well, we did live and die with the Tigers every year, and it was fun.
Well, for years, and still do occasionally, we'll get together with that Tiger group here in Jamestown, and Gordy was always front row and center.
There are enough Tiger fans in town that they finally all got together and they would have a meeting once a summer.
At my house, yeah. Those were really good times. And so Gordy, his career was sales. I mean, sales, golf, and baseball.
That was his life. Incidentally, he ended up with a wife and 3 kids.
Well, very proud of him. He was very proud of all that.
He was a devoted husband and father.
So how long have you been here at Lutheran?
And just less than a year.
Oh, is that right? Yeah.
Yeah, I fell and hurt a knee, and I'm not sure how I was in rehab. That's how I ended. I was in rehab for a while, and I ended up from there. Did I fall again? I really can't remember all the details of how I ended up where I am.
Well, we're so delighted you're here today. So if you had, here we are, you've been great, Sally, by the way. Any sort of question, you knew you were coming here today. You knew you were coming. Greg Peterson was going to ask you questions.
Right.
Is there a question you expected I would ask and I have not?
Oh dear. I don't think so. I think we pretty much covered the basis. I'm here. He would have been here because he and your father worked at Goodell and Carlson. That's how, the long story is that's why Greg and I know each other.
Well, yes, indeed. And many a day. And you know what I also remember is Gordy would come over to the house, and we were kids. I mean, really kids.
Oh, yeah.
And my mother was making sure we went to bed so we could get up the next morning to go to school. And they would start laughing and laughing. And then they'd also use, because there was a guy talk, you know, the language was a little bit of raw.
Of course.
And my mother, must tell you, was not ever used to raw language other than occasionally from my dad. But that was it. I mean, it wasn't in dialogue.
Oh, no.
And when that would go on and on, and you could tell it was midnight, 1 o'clock, I didn't, it just kept going. And my mother would come down and basically say, "Oh, Lyle, Gordy, stop." But they didn't.
Your mother was wonderful.
Yeah, but those were good memories. And of course, Gordy was always good to us kids. I mean, he was this guy we forgot to mention the fact the reason he was in a uniform, he was drafted, wasn't it, Korea?
Yes, he was drafted, determined, had an offer, and he ended up, we said, he fought the Battle of the Potomac because he ended up as a corporal in Washington working in an office.
Yeah.
And he had an officer who found out he played golf.
Yeah.
So they played together, and then he realized that the reason the officer was trying to recruit him, he realized that the reason he was being so friendly, trying to recruit him, was that he wanted him to enlist.
Ah.
And he wasn't about to make a career out of the service and doing his 2 years and going home. Fortunately, because if he'd gone the service, I never would have met him.
Yeah, there you go. Serendipity. Oh, serendipity. Well, this has been great, Sally. Thank you.
Yeah, you're very welcome.
Great. So the kids will get a kick out of all of this.
Oh, you're doing this for the children?
Your children, yeah.
Oh, might have. That's fine.